Have you ever heard the whispers of an entire civilization? A vast culture stretching across 1 million square kilometers that simply vanishes. A place with no grand palaces, no soaring pyramids, and no obvious kings or queens. Yet it built cities with plumbing so advanced it makes some modern towns look like a bad joke. This is the strange, almost silent story of the Indus Valley Civilization, a society that built with bricks and precision, but left behind no great epics or royal decrees to tell us their full story. A mystery wrapped in the silence of 5,000 years. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's go all the way back, before the pyramids were built, and before even the oldest stories of Mesopotamia were being sung, to a time when the first quiet murmurs of a new kind of human life were beginning to echo across a vast, fertile plain. The story of the Indus Valley Civilization doesn't begin with grand cities, but with something far more humble and, in its own way, much more profound: mud and seeds. Our journey starts in the fertile crescent of what is now the Balochistan region of Pakistan, at a site called Mehrgar, which is just about as far back as we can possibly go, with any kind of archaeological clarity, around 7000 BCE, long before the great urban centers would even be a dream. Small, scattered groups of people began to do something revolutionary. They stopped roaming and started planting, turning a wild gamble of a hunt into the predictable, nourishing rhythm of farming. It was a slow, almost glacial change, but it was the most important step they would ever take. The simple act of planting barley and wheat and domesticating animals like sheep and goats anchored them to the land. And in that anchoring, something new could finally begin to grow. These early communities lived in simple mud brick houses, not much more than a room or two, but they were the foundations upon which an entire civilization would one day stand. You can almost picture them, a handful of families, their lives revolving around the seasons, their hands in the dirt, their eyes on the slow, greening promise of the fields. They were the original architects of permanence. Over the next few millennia, these small settlements began to multiply and expand, a slow-motion population boom across the vast plains of the Indus River. The period from about 4000 to 2600 BCE is what we call the pre-Harappan or early Harappan phase, a time of quiet innovation that set the stage for everything that was to come. You see, the people of this age weren't just farming. They were experimenting. They learned to fire clay, transforming simple mud into durable pottery that they would decorate with geometric designs and sometimes with charming little animals. They developed better tools, refined their agricultural techniques, and perhaps, most importantly, they started to build more complex social structures. This wasn't a sudden flash of brilliance. It was the result of thousands of years of trial and error, a long, slow accumulation of knowledge. It's a bit like watching a kid learn to ride a bike. A lot of falling down and a lot of wobbles, but eventually they find their balance and take off. These communities were finding their balance. The sites from this era, like Kot Diji and Amri, show us a fascinating evolution. We see villages with proper walls, a sign that they were beginning to think about defense and community identity. we find evidence of trade, with goods like lapis lazuli and carnelian making their way from distant quarries, a hint that these small farming villages were already looking beyond their immediate surroundings. They were starting to connect, to form a web of exchange that would later become a vast, intricate network. The pottery itself is a window into their world, and historians still argue whether the similarity in styles across different sites indicates a shared cultural identity or simply the widespread exchange of ideas. The designs, though simple, show a growing confidence in their craftsmanship, a desire for beauty that went beyond pure function. It's a beautiful thought, isn't it? That even as they were building the very foundations of their lives, they were also decorating them. By the time we get to around 3300 BCE, something even more profound happens. At sites like Harappa, we start to see the first glimmerings of what would become the hallmark of the civilization: standardized, baked bricks. These weren't just sun-dried mud. They were fired in kilns, making them incredibly strong and durable. It's a bit like deciding to build your house out of Legos that all fit together perfectly, rather than just random rocks you found in the yard. This seemingly simple technological leap would allow them to build on a scale previously unimaginable, to create not just a collection of buildings, but a true urban environment. This period is a bridge, the final, crucial link between the small, self-sufficient villages and the monumental cities that would soon rise from the earth. The air, which for thousands of years had smelled of dust and growing things, was beginning to carry the scent of smoke from kilns and the quiet hum of a society on the verge of greatness. The whispers were getting louder, and the rhythm of life was accelerating, building towards a crescendo that would be heard for centuries to come. As the centuries ticked by, the small sparks of human ingenuity that began at Mergar were steadily growing into a fire, a complex, interconnected network of burgeoning cultures that stretched across the river plains. It was in this cradle of civilization, a vast and fertile floodplain, that the true legacy of Mehrgar would finally be realized. Around 2600 BCE, something truly incredible happened across the entire region almost simultaneously. It's a phenomenon that still gives archaeologists goosebumps. The quiet, slow-paced village life that had been evolving for thousands of years suddenly, and with astonishing speed, gave way to a full-blown urban revolution. This wasn't a gradual transition. It was as if someone had flipped a switch and the lights came on all over the Indus Valley. And the first, most illuminating light was found at a place called Mehrgar, the quiet, humble birthplace of all that followed. You see, Mehrgar wasn't just a village, it was a laboratory. The site, with its deep layers of human history, tells a story of relentless, incremental progress. From the earliest mud brick houses of the Neolithic era, we see a slow but steady increase in the complexity of their lives. They weren't just farming, they were experimenting with different crops, improving their tools, and mastering the art of creating ever finer pottery. The people of Merga, in their quiet, methodical way, were laying the groundwork for everything that was to come. They domesticated cattle, which not only provided a steady source of food and milk, but also became a vital part of their labor force. They were the first to develop a type of dental surgery, a fact that always makes me wince just a little bit. but also speaks volumes about their advanced understanding of the human body. They weren't just surviving, they were improving. The archaeological record at Mehrgar is a masterclass in patience and perseverance. The site's layers are like the pages of a very old book, each one telling a slightly different story, but all connected by a central theme of human innovation. We see the shift from crude, hand-thrown pots to beautifully wheel-turned pottery, decorated with intricate geometric designs. We find evidence of trade with distant lands, with precious stones like turquoise and lapis lazuli, neither of which is found locally, making their way to Mergar. This shows that even in these early stages, the inhabitants were part of a growing regional network of exchange. They were not isolated islands. They were connected by a web of commerce and shared culture. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of certain pottery designs across different sites at this time indicates a single cultural group or simply the easy spread of fashionable new ideas, like a prehistoric trendsetter. The real genius of the Mergar people, however, wasn't just in their individual inventions. It was in their ability to build on the past. The early settlements at Mergar were a testament to this cumulative learning. They built their homes not in a haphazard jumble, but in a deliberate, organized way, with streets and shared spaces. They buried their dead with a surprising amount of care, often with grave goods that suggest a belief in an afterlife, or at least a deep respect for their departed loved ones. This is where we see the first inklings of a more complex society, one that had time not just for the necessities of survival, but also for ritual, art, and community. The people were learning to live together, to cooperate on a larger scale. This slow-burning evolution eventually led to a period that archaeologists call the Kot Diji phase, named after another important site. This was the final critical step before the full urban florescence. In this era, we see fortified settlements with massive mud brick walls constructed for defense. This suggests a more competitive or perhaps even dangerous environment, but it also shows a greater degree of social organization and collective labor. The pottery became even more refined, with new shapes and techniques, and the use of the potter's wheel became widespread. We start to see the first examples of the famous terracotta bull figurines and the use of a simple red on black painted ware that would become a hallmark of the later Harappan period. It was as if all the scattered threads of innovation that had been developed over thousands of years were finally being woven together into a single, cohesive tapestry. The story of Mehergar and its contemporaries isn't a flashy tale of conquest or empire. It's a quiet, patient story of human progress, of the slow, methodical work of generations who laid a foundation so strong that it could support some of the most advanced cities in the ancient world. Their journey from nomadic hunters to settled farmers, from small villages to fortified towns, was the essential first chapter in the great story of the Indus Valley Civilization. They may not have built pyramids or palaces, but they did something arguably more important. They created the very possibility of a complex urban civilization, a feat of quiet, collective genius that is still awe-inspiring today. It was a long, slow climb, but as the sun rose on the third millennium BCE, they were finally at the summit, ready to build something truly spectacular. The quiet, patient work of generations finally paid off, and the scene was set for one of the most remarkable transformations in human history. The small, scattered towns and fortified villages that had developed during the pre-Harappan period began to do something extraordinary. They didn't just grow bigger, they grew smarter. It was as if a shared architectural blueprint, a collective sense of purpose, had been unlocked. This period, from roughly 2600 to 1900 BCE, is known as the mature Harappan phase, and it represents the true zenith of the Indus Valley Civilization. What had been a collection of slow-moving experiments suddenly became a unified, incredibly well-organized urban phenomenon. The villages were now giving way to something far grander: cities. It's hard to overstate the speed and scale of this change. Across a vast area, from the coasts of the Arabian Sea to the foothills of the Himalayas, and from modern-day Pakistan to parts of India, a uniform urban culture emerged. This wasn't a case of one powerful city-state conquering its neighbors and imposing its will. There's little evidence of warfare or conquest. Instead, it seems to have been a process of shared innovation and cultural convergence. It was as if all the different tribes and villages finally said, "Hey, this is a pretty good idea. Let's all do this." They began building with a precision and a consistency that is genuinely astonishing. They used standardized baked bricks in a 4:1 ratio of length, width, and height. Remember those primitive mud bricks from Mergar? Now, they were a perfectly uniform building block, like a prehistoric IKEA kit, but for entire cities. This standardization extended to everything from weights and measures to the designs on their pottery. This is a crucial point, and a fascinating one. It suggests a high degree of central planning and cultural unity, without the visible signs of a powerful king or a massive army to enforce it. The city building itself was a masterpiece of urban planning. They weren't just throwing up buildings wherever they pleased. The major cities, and even many smaller settlements, were laid out on a grid, a north-south and east-west pattern that would make a modern city planner proud. Streets were wide and straight, intersecting at right angles. This was no haphazard collection of dwellings. This was a deliberate, well-thought-out design. The streets were often paved and had a gentle slope to them, designed to channel rainwater and waste towards a remarkable system of drainage. This brings us to perhaps the most mind-boggling aspect of their urban life. Underneath the streets of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa ran a sophisticated system of covered sewers. Individual houses had their own bathrooms and latrines, which drained into these underground channels. Now, just think about that for a second. At a time when much of the rest of the world was, shall we say, less concerned with hygiene, the people of the Indus Valley had a system that wouldn't be seen again in many parts of the world for thousands of years. It's the kind of thing that makes you want to go back in time and ask them for some building tips. The cities themselves were often divided into two main sections: a high mound or citadel to the west, and a larger lower city to the east. The citadel wasn't a fortress in the military sense. It seems to have been a place for public buildings, perhaps administrative or religious in function. At Mohenjo-Daro, the citadel contained the Great Bath, a large rectangular public pool with a watertight floor and a drainage system that allowed it to be filled and emptied. It was a marvel of ancient engineering and suggests a culture that valued cleanliness, ritual bathing, or both. Historians still argue whether the Great Bath was used for religious rituals or simply as a public bathing area for the elite. In the lower city, the houses were arranged in blocks, with most of them being of similar size and layout, suggesting a remarkable degree of social equality. While there were some larger homes, there were no grand palaces or ostentatious displays of wealth. This is another one of those great mysteries that make the Indus civilization so intriguing. The transition from village to city wasn't just about buildings, it was about people. The cities became hubs for specialized labor. Farmers still worked the fields outside the city walls, but inside you would find potters, jewelers, metallurgists, and merchants. The population was large enough to support this kind of economic specialization, and the cities became engines of commerce and innovation. The newfound scale of life required new ways of doing things. It required bureaucracy, trade networks, and a system of shared symbols and values. This is when the famous Indus seals begin to appear in large numbers, small square or rectangular pieces of steatite carved with animal motifs and an undeciphered script. They were likely used to mark goods for trade, a sort of prehistoric barcode or brand logo. They are a testament to the thriving economic life that now pulsed through the heart of the civilization. The story of the Indus people was no longer just the story of a few farmers. It was now the grand saga of 1 million people building a new kind of world, one perfectly aligned with the stars and with a healthy respect for sanitation. And so, we arrive at the heart of the story, the shining jewels in the crown of the Indus Valley Civilization, the twin cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. These two great urban centers, separated by over 600 kilometers, were the largest and most impressive settlements of their time, and they offer us the clearest window into the Harappan way of life. They were not just big towns, they were masterworks of urban design, monuments to a civilization's collective genius. If you were to visit either of them in their heyday, the first thing that would strike you is the sheer scale and order. It was like stepping into a futuristic city that had been designed with an almost obsessive level of precision. The streets were wide, straight, and laid out in a perfect grid pattern, running north-south and east-west. It was so well planned, you could probably find your way around without a map, which is more than I can say for some modern cities I've visited. Harappa, rediscovered first, was the first city to lend its name to the entire civilization. It was a bustling metropolis, sprawling across more than 150 hectares, and it was a hub of industry and trade. Imagine a city where everything was built with a consistent, uniform kind of baked brick, a level of standardization that is completely unprecedented for the time. This wasn't just a convenience, it was a symbol of a highly organized, cohesive society. The streets were meticulously clean, and they were lined with houses that were remarkably similar in size and layout. This is one of the most puzzling and intriguing aspects of the Indus civilization. The absence of grand palaces or sprawling mansions that would signify a powerful ruling class. It's almost as if everyone was living a surprisingly equitable life. with good houses, access to clean water, and a similar standard of living. Historians still argue whether this lack of ostentatious wealth means the Harappans were a highly egalitarian society, or if their leadership simply didn't express its power through monumental buildings like the Egyptians or Mesopotamians did. But if Harappa was a jewel, Mohenjo-Daro was the entire crown. It was even larger, and its preservation is truly remarkable. The name itself means Mound of the Dead Men in Sindhi, a somewhat spooky but fitting name for a city that was buried and then rediscovered thousands of years later. At its peak, Mohenjo-Daro was a city of an estimated 40,000 people, a massive population for the ancient world. The first thing you'd notice is the elevated citadel on the western side of the city. As we discussed, this wasn't a fortress. It was a platform for public buildings, and on that platform was the Great Granary and the Great Bath. The granary, while its exact function is still debated, was a large structure with ventilation, suggesting it was used for storing grain, a vital part of a planned economy. The Great Bath, however, is a true masterpiece of engineering. It's a large, perfectly sealed tank made of baked brick, with a staircase leading down to the water, and a sophisticated drain that allowed it to be emptied. The floor was waterproofed with a layer of bitumen, a sticky tar-like substance. The level of engineering required to make this work is mind-boggling, and it tells us that these were a people who had a sophisticated understanding of materials and construction. The existence of this public bath, so central to the city's plan, suggests a strong cultural emphasis on ritual cleanliness or community bathing, a practice that continues to this day in the region. The lower city of Mohenjo-Daro was a testament to urban planning and hygiene. Every house, and I mean every house, had its own well, a bathing area, and a toilet that drained into the city's extensive sewer system. These sewers were covered with brick slabs, a completely revolutionary concept. This wasn't just a luxury for the rich. It was a basic part of life for everyone in the city. Imagine an entire society where sanitation was considered a public good and a fundamental right. It's a remarkable historical fact that the Indus people had an understanding of public health and hygiene that far surpassed their contemporaries in other parts of the world. They were, in many ways, the original clean freaks. Beyond the buildings, these cities were a hive of activity. You would have seen artisans working with copper and bronze, merchants trading goods in the bustling marketplace, and potters creating the beautiful uniform ceramics that have been found across the region. There was no visible center of power, no gigantic statues of a ruler, no ostentatious temples dedicated to a specific god. The power of the Indus civilization seems to have resided not in a single person, but in the collective organization and the shared infrastructure. It was a civilization that valued efficiency, uniformity, and the quiet dignity of a well-organized life. The people of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro built a world that was as pragmatic as it was impressive, a civilization that, in its own way, was just as grand as the pyramids and ziggurats being built at the same time, but with a lot less drama. The cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were not just random collections of buildings. They were a testament to an almost obsessive focus on urban planning and advanced engineering. It's the kind of thing that makes you wonder if they had a collective design bureau, a group of quiet, methodical people with rulers and compasses who made sure everything was just so. The hallmark of their cities was a deliberate, grid-like layout, a pattern of streets and alleys that intersected at perfectly right angles. This wasn't something you'd see in contemporary Mesopotamia or Egypt, where cities grew more organically, like a chaotic web. The Harappans were different. They preferred order, and that order extended from the grand scale of the city down to the smallest details of a single home. It was as if they saw the city as a single, coherent machine, and every part had to be designed to work in harmony. The main streets were wide enough for two carts to pass comfortably, and they were lined with neat rows of houses, giving the cities an almost modern suburban feel. There was no sense of a haphazard jumble, no maze-like alleyways that would get you lost. This was a city built for flow and function, a rare quality in the ancient world. But the real genius of their engineering was invisible, hidden beneath the carefully laid brick streets. The Indus people, bless their sanitary little hearts, had a deep and abiding love for clean water and efficient waste disposal. This obsession led them to build one of the most advanced drainage systems of the ancient world. Underneath every major street ran a network of covered sewers made of baked bricks. These weren't just shallow ditches. They were proper channels with gentle slopes, designed to carry wastewater away from the city. Even more remarkably, individual houses were connected to this system. Most homes had a private bathing area and a simple latrine that emptied into the main drains. This level of public sanitation was completely unheard of at the time. While the Egyptians were building pyramids and the Mesopotamians were raising ziggurats, the Harappans were building what was essentially a prehistoric wastewater treatment plant. Historians still argue whether this sanitation system was a product of a sophisticated understanding of public health or a cultural and religious emphasis on ritual purity. But either way, the results were the same. A cleaner, healthier urban environment. The materials they used were just as impressive as the systems they built. The Harappans were master brick makers. They used a specific type of standardized baked brick with a perfectly consistent size ratio of 4.2.1. This is a genuinely important detail. It means that bricks made in Harappa, 600 kilometers away from Mohenjo-Daro, would be exactly the same size and could be used interchangeably. This is another piece of evidence for a high degree of central planning and a shared cultural identity. It also made construction incredibly efficient. You didn't have to custom fit every single brick. They all just worked together. This standardization wasn't limited to bricks either. They had a system of weights and measures that was also uniform across the entire civilization. Archaeologists have found perfectly cubic stone weights in various sizes, suggesting a standardized system for trade and commerce. It's like they had invented the metric system thousands of years before anyone else. This obsession with uniformity speaks volumes about their society. They valued order, precision, and consistency. The engineering prowess of the Harappans wasn't limited to their cities. They were also skilled at water management. In addition to the urban drainage systems, they built large wells that provided fresh water to the city's inhabitants. At Mohenjo-Daro alone, Over 700 wells have been discovered, a testament to the fact that water was a fundamental resource and a priority. They even built a massive, watertight public pool known as the Great Bath, a structure that would have required a deep understanding of materials and hydraulics to construct. The floor was sealed with bitumen, and the walls were made of perfectly laid, waterproofed bricks. This was no simple swimming hole. It was a feat of civil engineering. While there's no grand palace or temple to point to, the collective effort and organization required to build and maintain these cities speaks to a complex and sophisticated society. The level of social cooperation needed to create and maintain a public sewer system, or to standardize brick sizes across 1 million square kilometers, is almost staggering. It suggests a civilization that was highly organized and perhaps even democratic in its values, or at least one where the collective good was prioritized over individual grandiosity. The Indus people built a world that was practical, clean, and efficient, a monument not to a single ruler's ego, but to the quiet, methodical genius of an entire culture. They were the original engineers of urban life, and their legacy is still buried just beneath the surface, waiting to tell its story, with the cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa standing as testaments to their engineering prowess. It's natural to wonder about the people who lived within them. Who were they? What did their society look like? This is one of the most fascinating and at the same time most frustrating questions about the Indus Valley Civilization. Unlike ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, they left no grand inscriptions detailing the lives of their pharaohs or kings, no lists of powerful priests, and no elaborate tombs filled with the regalia of a royal court. The people of the Indus Valley seem to have been more interested in pragmatic, everyday life than in self-aggrandizing displays of power. This quiet absence of hierarchy is one of the most remarkable things about them. But that doesn't mean their society was a simple one. Far from it. The evidence points to a society that was highly organized, but perhaps not in the way we're used to thinking about ancient civilizations. We don't see massive disparities in wealth. The houses in the lower cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa are remarkably uniform in size and construction, while there are some larger homes that might have belonged to more prominent families or merchants. There are no sprawling palaces that suggest a hereditary ruling class. This has led many historians to suggest that the Indus civilization was a highly egalitarian society, or at least one where wealth and power were distributed more widely than in contemporary cultures. The power may have been held by a council of elders, a group of merchants, or perhaps even a religious authority, rather than a single, all-powerful king. The lack of military fortifications or grand monuments to a ruler's ego further supports this idea. Their power seems to have been collective and administrative, not individual and coercive. But even without a king, there was a clear division of labor. The cities were hubs of economic specialization, a place where people could pursue a trade beyond farming. You would have seen master craftsmen working with a variety of materials. The discovery of different workshop areas within the cities gives us a glimpse into this specialized economy. There were potters who created the stunningly consistent and well-made ceramics that are found across the civilization. There were skilled artisans who worked with steatite, a soft stone, to create the ubiquitous seals that are one of the defining features of the civilization. And then there were the metallurgists, who were experts in working with copper and bronze to create tools, weapons, and beautiful decorative objects. The famous dancing girl figurine, a small but stunning bronze statue found at Mohenjo-Daro, is a perfect example of their metallurgical skills and their artistic sensibilities. It's a tiny sculpture, but the life and energy it conveys are absolutely incredible. The social hierarchy, subtle as it may be, was likely based on occupation. There were the farmers who lived in the surrounding villages and supplied the cities with food. Within the cities, there were the skilled artisans and craftsmen who produced the goods for trade and daily life. And then there were the merchants, who were likely a powerful and influential class. Given the importance of trade to the civilization's economy, their seals, which we'll talk about more later, were probably used to mark their goods and verify their origin, a bit like a modern-day trademark. There may have also been an intellectual or priestly class, perhaps the people who were responsible for the creation of the script and the administration of the city. But we have no concrete evidence for what their role was or how much power they held. The fact that we have no clear-cut evidence for a priestly class with a clear-cut role is one of the fascinating scholarly debates. Historians still argue whether the apparent lack of religious structures and large, obvious temples indicates a less formalized religious system, or simply that their places of worship haven't been discovered yet. The people of the Indus civilization seem to have been a pragmatic, hard-working lot. They were master engineers, skilled artisans, and sophisticated merchants. Their society was a marvel of organization, a place where people lived in relative peace and a surprising degree of equality, at least by ancient standards. There were no monumental structures built on the backs of thousands of enslaved laborers. There were no great pyramids to a single person's ego. The Harappan's greatness was in their collective effort, in the way they built a society that worked for everyone, from the lowliest farmer to the most prominent merchant. Their society was a product of collective ingenuity and shared purpose, a quiet, methodical masterpiece in an age of loud, boastful empires. The Indus Valley Civilization, with its meticulously planned cities and standardized bricks, was not an isolated island. Far from it. The Harappans were master merchants and savvy traders, and their economic reach extended far beyond the banks of the Indus River. Their prosperity was built on a vast, intricate network of trade, a bustling exchange of goods that connected them not only to the smaller settlements within their own territory, but also to the great civilizations of the ancient world. They were the ultimate middlemen, linking the resources of their own region with the insatiable markets of Mesopotamia and beyond. This intricate web of commerce is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence we have for the scale and sophistication of their society. The air, which once smelled of smoke from kilns, and the quiet hum of a society on the verge of greatness, now also carried the distinct aroma of exotic spices and the promise of distant shores. The first, and perhaps most important, aspect of their economy was internal trade. The civilization was vast, 1 million square kilometers, and no single region had all the resources it needed. The Harappans had a remarkable ability to move goods from one end of their territory to the other. They traded raw materials like stone, wood, and metals, as well as finished products like pottery, jewelry, and beads. They used a system of standardized weights, tiny, polished stone cubes that have been found in sites across the entire civilization. This uniformity meant that a merchant in Lothal could weigh out goods and know that the same weight would be understood and accepted in Harappa, 600 kilometers away. This is a remarkable historical fact and a testament to their organizational skills. It's the kind of thing that makes you think they invented the concept of quality control. The trade routes, both overland and via river, were the lifeblood of the civilization, connecting the agricultural heartland to the coastal cities and the mineral-rich highlands. But it was their international trade that truly made them a major player on the world stage. The Harappans had a thriving trade relationship with Mesopotamia, a connection that is proven by a mountain of archaeological evidence. We know this because Indus seals and other artifacts have been found in the ruins of Sumerian cities like Ur and Kish. Conversely, a number of Mesopotamian goods, though fewer in number, have been discovered in Indus sites. The Mesopotamians referred to a land they called Meluha, and most scholars now agree that this was the name they used for the Indus Valley Civilization. They wrote about it in their cuneiform tablets, describing it as a land of exotic goods, including carnelian beads, gold, and other precious materials. The Mesopotamians were particularly fond of Indus carnelian beads, which were a stunning shade of orange and were often decorated with intricate patterns. The Harappan artisans were incredibly skilled at making these beads, and the demand for them in Mesopotamia was very high. The trade was conducted both overland and, perhaps more significantly, by sea. The Harappans had a deep connection to the Arabian Sea, and they were skilled sailors and navigators. The great port city of Lothal, which we will explore in a later section, was a major hub for this maritime trade. From Lothal, ships laden with goods would sail along the coast, stopping at ports along the way, before eventually making their way to the coast of Mesopotamia. This was a long and arduous journey, but the rewards were clearly worth it. The goods they traded weren't just luxury items. They also traded in more utilitarian things, like copper and tin for making bronze, and timber from the forests of the Himalayas. The Indus civilization had access to a wide range of natural resources, and they were able to leverage this to create a powerful and prosperous economy. Historians still argue whether the Indus trade with Mesopotamia was a direct two-way street, or if it was conducted through a series of intermediaries in places like the Persian Gulf. Regardless of the exact mechanism, the existence of this trade is a powerful reminder that the ancient world was far more interconnected than we often imagine. The people of the Indus Valley weren't just building cities for themselves. They were participating in a global economy. Their seals, their unique pottery, and their distinctive beads were traveling across vast distances, a silent testament to the ingenuity and ambition of a civilization that had no kings or armies to broadcast its power. The legacy of the Harappans isn't just in their cities. It's also in the quiet, dusty remains of a broken seal found thousands of miles from where it was made. A small but powerful echo of a trading empire that once spanned continents. In a civilization that left no great epics or royal decrees, the most tantalizing and enduring mystery lies in the symbols they left behind. Scattered across 1 million square kilometers, on thousands of tiny seals, bits of pottery, and even a few copper plates are the characters of the Indus script. It is a beautiful, elegant, and completely undeciphered language. Imagine finding a diary from a long-lost ancestor, only to discover it was written in a code no one has ever been able to crack. That's the challenge of the Indus script, and it's a mystery that has captivated scholars for a century, turning brilliant minds into detectives and leading to more dead ends than a bad GPS. The silence of the script is perhaps the loudest sound of the entire civilization. The script is a collection of around 400 distinct signs, which means it's not an alphabet like ours, where each letter represents a sound. It's too small to be a logographic script like Chinese, where each character represents a whole word, but it's too large to be a simple syllabary. This has led most scholars to believe it's a logosyllabic system, a combination of symbols for words and syllables, a bit like Egyptian hieroglyphs. The signs themselves are a fascinating mix of abstract symbols and pictographs, with simple stick figures of people, animals, and objects, like a fish, a pot, or a stylized human. They are always written from right to left, and sometimes in a very cool and very specific way. They alternate lines from right to left and left to right, a writing style known as boustrophodon, or as the ox turns. It's a bit of a nerdy detail, but it speaks to a deliberate, organized system of writing. The script is most often found on small, carved seals made of steatite, a soft, easily carvable stone. These seals are a major source of information about the Harappan world. They are typically square, with an animal motif carved on top, and a line of the script carved above the animal. The animals are beautifully rendered and include a unicorn-like creature, a bull, an elephant, and a rhino. The unicorn is particularly mysterious, appearing on a majority of the seals. What did it symbolize? Was it a mythical beast, a clan symbol, or something else entirely? We don't know. The most famous seal is the one known as the Pashupati seal, which shows a seated figure, perhaps a deity, surrounded by animals. This seal has led to much speculation about their religion and is often cited as a possible precursor to the Hindu god Shiva. The seals were likely used for administrative and commercial purposes, to mark goods and packages for trade, to signify ownership, or to serve as a kind of identity marker. Imagine a merchant in Harappa receiving a shipment of goods from Lothal, and the seal on the package would verify its origin and contents. It was a brand and a signature all in one. But what did the script on the seal say? Was it the merchant's name? Was it a record of the goods? Was it a prayer? We simply don't know. This lack of a Rosetta Stone, a bilingual inscription that would allow us to decipher the script, is the single biggest obstacle to understanding the Indus civilization. Without a translation, the voices of the Harappans remain silent. We can see their cities, we can admire their art, but we can't read their thoughts, their history, or their literature. Despite the fact that we can't read it, the existence of the script itself is a significant fact. It points to a sophisticated and literate society, one that had a need for written communication. The fact that the script is found across such a vast area, from Pakistan to Gujarat, suggests a shared language and a shared culture. Historians still argue whether the script was used to write a Dravidian language, a Proto-Indo-European language, or something else entirely. But the debate remains purely theoretical without a way to prove it. The script's existence, though, hints at a complex administrative system, a means of keeping records for trade, and perhaps even a form of religious or poetic expression. It's a reminder that beneath the clean, pragmatic surface of their cities, there was a rich, intellectual life that we can only glimpse, a fascinating puzzle waiting for the right person to finally find the key. Maybe someday, a new discovery will unlock the secrets of the script, and the silent whispers of the Indus people will finally become a roar for a civilization that left behind no great monuments to its gods or clear evidence of a centralized religion. The question of what the Harappans believed is one of the biggest mysteries of all. Unlike the Egyptians with their pantheon of animal-headed deities, or the Mesopotamians with their ziggurats and elaborate creation myths, the Indus people seem to have kept their spiritual life more personal. We don't find massive temples or a powerful priestly class as we do elsewhere. Instead, our understanding of their beliefs is pieced together from a much more subtle and frankly more interesting collection of clues. Tiny figurines, mysterious seals, and the occasional ritualistic artifact. It's like trying to understand a person's faith just by looking at the small charms they keep in their pockets. And what we find is a world full of quiet symbolism, with a strong connection to nature and fertility. The most common artifacts we find that give us a hint about their religion are the small, hand-modeled terracotta figurines. There are thousands of them, and they are found in nearly every Indus site. A large number of these are representations of women, often with elaborate headdresses and a surprisingly plump figure. These are widely believed to be images of a mother goddess, a deity associated with fertility, creation, and the nurturing of life. This makes a lot of sense for a civilization so dependent on the bountiful, life-giving waters of the Indus River and the productivity of the land. The belief in a powerful female deity who oversaw the cycles of life and death would have been a comforting and logical one for an agrarian society. You can almost imagine these figurines being kept in homes, a small symbol of hope and protection for a good harvest and healthy children. Then there are the seals. We talked about them as a form of writing and commerce, but they are also a window into the Harappan mind. Many of the seals feature images of animals, some real, like the rhino, tiger, and elephant, and some, like the famous one-horned unicorn, that are mythical or stylized. The most famous of all is the so-called Pashupati seal. It shows a seated, three-faced figure with a horned headdress, surrounded by various animals, including a tiger, an elephant, a rhino, and a buffalo. The figure is seated in a yogic pose, and the presence of the animals has led many scholars to suggest that this is a precursor to the Hindu god Shiva, who is often depicted as the lord of the animals, Pashupati. It's a tantalizing theory and a fascinating example of how ancient beliefs may have influenced later religions. The figure's meditative pose also suggests a culture that valued introspection or a connection to a higher power through personal practice. rather than through public ceremony. Beyond these two major pieces of evidence, there are other small clues. We have evidence of what may be ritual bathing, most notably the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, a perfect piece of engineering that was likely used for purification rituals, a practice that is still central to many South Asian religions. We find fire altars in some sites, suggesting some form of fire-based rituals or sacrifices. There are also small, circular stone objects that some scholars believe are representations of a lingam and yoni, symbols of creation and the divine feminine and masculine, which are also important in later Hinduism. These are all small pieces of a very large, very incomplete puzzle. Historians still argue whether the Indus people worshipped a single, central deity or a variety of regional gods. The archaeological evidence suggests a more decentralized, less formalized religious practice. This could be a reflection of the egalitarian nature of their society. The absence of a king or a powerful priestly class means there was no one to enforce a state religion or to build grand monuments to a single god. Instead, their religion seems to have been something that was practiced in the home, in a quiet, personal way. It was a belief system that was deeply connected to the natural world, to the great river that gave them life, to the animals that surrounded them, and to the cycles of fertility and growth. The Harappans' faith was perhaps as pragmatic and grounded as their cities, a gentle, daily practice that was woven into the very fabric of their lives, without the need for grand pronouncements or massive displays of devotion. While the cities themselves are a testament to their engineering and urban planning, a closer look at the smaller objects they left behind reveals a civilization with a deep appreciation for beauty and an incredible level of skill. The Harappans were not just builders, they were also masterful artisans and craftsmen, creating objects that were both functional and aesthetically pleasing. Their artistry is a quiet, elegant statement, one that speaks of a culture that valued detail, precision, and a certain kind of refined simplicity. You can almost feel the smooth, cool surface of a pot or the weight of a stone bead as you look at their creations, a tactile connection to a world that vanished thousands of years ago. One of the most striking things about Harappan art is the sheer consistency of the style. The pottery, for example, is instantly recognizable across the entire civilization. They used the potter's wheel to create perfectly symmetrical vessels, and they decorated them with geometric patterns as well as stylized images of animals and plants. The red and black color scheme is a hallmark of their work, and the designs are both simple and elegant. This kind of consistency across such a vast territory is a strong indicator of a shared cultural identity, and perhaps even a widespread workshop system that produced these goods. It's the kind of thing that suggests a society with a clear artistic tradition and a love for a certain kind of design aesthetic. Beyond pottery, the Harappans were also exceptional jewelers. They worked with a variety of materials, from precious metals like gold and silver to semi-precious stones like carnelian, lapis lazuli, and steatite. They were particularly skilled at working with carnelian, a stone that they would heat to change its color to a stunning shade of deep orange red. They would then drill tiny holes through the beads with remarkable precision. a feat that would be difficult even with modern tools. The jewelry they created included intricate necklaces, bracelets, and amulets. The pieces are often surprisingly delicate and show a sophisticated understanding of design. It's a bit like seeing a modern, minimalist piece of jewelry and then remembering it was made over 4,000 years ago. The most famous piece of Harappan art is a small bronze statue found at Mohenjo-Daro, known as the Dancing Girl. It's only about 10.5 centimeters tall, but it is a masterpiece of ancient sculpture. The figurine depicts a young woman with a defiant posture, her left arm covered in bangles, and her right hand resting on her hip. Her hair is tied back in a messy bun, and her expression is one of confidence and poise. The statue is a testament to the Harappans' mastery of the lost wax casting technique, a complex process that involves creating a wax model, encasing it in clay, melting out the wax, and then pouring molten metal into the empty mold. The fact that they were capable of this level of metallurgical sophistication is a stunning historical fact. The dancing girl is not just a piece of art. She is a personality, a small, vibrant slice of Harappan life that has been perfectly preserved for us to admire. The iconic Indus seals, which we've talked about before, are also a form of art. Each one is a miniature sculpture with a beautifully carved animal motif and an inscription in the undeciphered script. The animals, from the powerful bull to the mysterious unicorn, are rendered with a powerful sense of form and character. These seals were not just tools of trade, they were also works of art, small, portable expressions of the Harappan aesthetic. The craftsmen who created them were not just skilled workers, they were artists in their own right, and their creations are a reminder that this was a civilization that valued beauty and craftsmanship as much as it valued efficiency and order. The quiet artistry of the Harappan people is a powerful counterpoint to the pragmatic and utilitarian nature of their cities, a reminder that beneath the surface of their organized lives was a deep and enduring human creativity. While the great cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa capture our imagination, it's easy to forget that the vast majority of the Harappan population did not live in these urban centers. The true heart of the Indus Valley Civilization was not in its towering, planned cities, but in the thousands of smaller towns, villages, and hamlets that dotted the landscape. These were the places where life was lived to the rhythm of the seasons and the flow of the river, and they are essential to understanding the full scope of the Harappan world. To truly get a sense of this civilization, you have to look beyond the grand boulevards and into the quiet, dusty fields where the real work was done. Life in these smaller settlements was, in many ways, a microcosm of life in the cities, but on a more intimate scale. They were still built with a degree of planning and organization, with houses often arranged in neat rows and with a shared well or communal space. While they lacked the elaborate drainage systems of the major cities, they still had an understanding of sanitation and urban order. The houses were also made of the standardized baked bricks, a testament to the cultural unity that stretched across the entire civilization. It's a powerful image, a small, rural farmer's home, built with the exact same bricks used to build the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, a quiet nod to a shared identity. The primary function of these smaller settlements was agricultural production, The vast majority of the population were farmers, and they were incredibly skilled at it. They cultivated a wide variety of crops, including wheat, barley, and millet, and they were among the first to grow cotton for textiles. The Harappan people were masters of adapting to their environment. They used the yearly floods of the Indus River to their advantage, planting crops in the rich, silty soil left behind as the waters receded. They also developed a form of rudimentary irrigation, using canals to divert water from the river to their fields. This agricultural surplus was the engine that drove the entire civilization. Without the tireless work of the farmers, the great urban centers could not have existed. Their labor provided the food that fed the artisans, the merchants, and the administrators, allowing for the economic specialization that defined the Harappan cities. These smaller towns were also hubs for local trade and craft production. They weren't just agricultural centers, they were also places where goods were produced and exchanged. We find evidence of workshops for pottery, bead making, and other crafts in many of these sites, suggesting a decentralized economic system where production was spread out across the landscape. The goods they produced would have been traded with neighboring villages and with the larger cities, creating a complex web of economic interdependence. This network of exchange was the circulatory system of the civilization, connecting the raw materials from the countryside with the finished products of the city. The lives of the people in these settlements were likely simpler and more closely tied to the cycles of nature. Their days would have been spent in the fields, in the communal courtyards, and in the small, intimate spaces of their homes. We find terracotta figurines and other small artifacts in these villages, which suggests that the religious and cultural practices we see in the cities were also present here, a shared spiritual life that bound the people together regardless of where they lived. It's a beautiful thought, isn't it? That a farmer in a tiny village in the Punjab would have shared the same artistic sensibilities and perhaps the same beliefs as a merchant in Mohenjo-Daro, a testament to the powerful, unifying force of their culture. Life in the smaller settlements provides a crucial counterbalance to the grandeur of the cities. It reminds us that this was a civilization built from the ground up, with the foundation laid by countless generations of farmers and craftsmen. It shows us that the core values of the Harappan culture, its emphasis on order, its love of craftsmanship, and its deep connection to the land, were not confined to the urban elite, but were shared by everyone, from the most prominent merchant to the most humble villager. The story of the Indus Valley Civilization is not just the story of its cities, it's the story of all its people, and their quiet, unassuming lives are just as important as the grandest monument. The Harappan civilization, for all its urban sophistication, was fundamentally an agricultural society. Its existence, its prosperity, and its very survival were all tied directly to the great river system that gave it its name. The Indus River, along with its tributaries, was not just a geographic feature. It was the heart and soul of the civilization, providing the fertile soil and the water necessary to feed a massive urban population. The Harappans' success lay in their ability to master their environment, to harness the power of the river and the cycles of the seasons to produce a surplus of food that could support their sprawling cities. The air, once filled with the quiet hum of a society on the rise, was now also thick with the scent of a bountiful harvest, a testament to their agricultural genius. The Harappans were among the most innovative farmers of the ancient world. They cultivated a wide variety of crops, including wheat and barley, which were the staples of their diet. But they also grew other things, including lentils, chickpeas, and a wide array of fruits and vegetables. Their most significant contribution, however, was the cultivation of cotton, a plant they were the first to domesticate and weave into textiles. The discovery of cotton cloth fragments at Mohenjo-Daro and other sites is a crucial historical fact, as it tells us that the Harappans were pioneers in textile production. This meant they not only had a staple food source, but also a valuable cash crop for trade. The ability to grow cotton gave them a key advantage in the world of ancient commerce. Their agricultural techniques were a masterclass in adapting to a unique environment. The Indus River, like the Nile, would flood every year, depositing a rich, silty layer of topsoil across the floodplain. The Harappans took advantage of this natural phenomenon by practicing flood recession farming. They would plant their seeds in the moist soil after the floodwaters receded, allowing the crops to grow with the residual moisture. It's a bit like farming on a giant, naturally irrigated field. This method was incredibly efficient and productive, but it also had its risks, as a change in the river's course or a shift in the monsoon could spell disaster. To mitigate this, they also developed rudimentary forms of irrigation, using canals to divert water from the river to fields that were further away from the main channel. Another key to their success was the use of the plow, a tool that allowed them to till the soil more efficiently and increase their crop yields. Archaeologists have found evidence of plowed fields at sites like Kalibangan, a smaller settlement on the Ghaggar-Hakra riverbed. The discovery of a grid pattern of furrows in the field, with one set running north-south and the other east-west, is a fascinating detail that shows a remarkable level of precision in their agricultural practices. This was not just haphazard farming. This was a well-organized, large-scale operation. The people of the Indus Valley were also skilled at domesticating animals. They raised cattle, sheep, and goats, which provided them with a steady source of meat, milk, and wool. The cattle were particularly important, as they were used as draft animals for pulling carts and plows. The image of the great bull, which appears so often on their seals, is a testament to the animal's importance in their daily lives. The agricultural success of the Harappan civilization created a virtuous cycle. The food surplus allowed for the growth of a large, non-farming population in the cities. These city dwellers, freed from the necessity of growing their own food, could specialize in crafts, trade, and administration. This economic specialization, in turn, led to the creation of the goods that fueled the civilization's trade networks, which brought in even more wealth and resources. The cities and the countryside were in a symbiotic relationship, each one dependent on the other. It was a finely tuned machine, with the quiet, methodical work of the farmers providing the fuel for the grand urban engine. Historians still argue whether this system was managed by a central authority or a decentralized network of local councils. Whatever the case, their agricultural innovations and their symbiotic relationship with the Indus River were the foundation upon which their entire civilization was built. In a civilization that left no great monuments to its rulers or its wars, the most intimate and revealing glimpses of their lives come from the way they treated their dead. The archaeological evidence for Harappan burial practices is, like so much else about them, subtle and speaks volumes about their society's values. While we lack the elaborate, treasure-filled tombs of the pharaohs, the Harappan burial sites provide a quiet, dignified look into their beliefs about death and the afterlife, suggesting a society that was less concerned with individual grandeur and more with a simple, peaceful, final rest. The ground, which had been the source of their life and sustenance, was also the place where they would eventually return. The most common form of burial discovered at sites like Harappa is the simple inhumation burial. The deceased were typically laid to rest in a rectangular pit, often in a supine position, with their head facing north. The bodies were sometimes placed in wooden coffins, which have long since decayed, leaving only the outline in the soil. The grave goods found with the bodies are what offer us the most insight. These were not the vast hoards of gold and jewels you'd find in a royal tomb. Instead, they were typically simple pottery vessels, often filled with food or water, and a few personal ornaments, such as small beads or shell bracelets. The simplicity and consistency of these offerings across different graves suggest a belief in a peaceful afterlife, where the needs were simple and the journey was a quiet one. It also reinforces the idea of a relatively egalitarian society. There is a surprising lack of evidence for significant wealth disparity in the burials, with most graves containing a similar range of simple goods. Historians still argue whether this lack of ostentatious wealth means the Harappans were a truly egalitarian society, or if they simply had a different way of expressing status in death. While the majority of burials were simple inhumations, there are some variations that hint at more complex or specialized rituals. At some sites, archaeologists have found evidence of fractional burials, where only a few bones or a part of a skeleton were buried, suggesting a multi-stage burial process, or perhaps a secondary interment after the body had been exposed for a period of time. There is also limited evidence of cremation, with ashes found in some pottery urns, a practice that would become common in later South Asian cultures. These different methods suggest that, while there was a core belief system, there may have been regional or family-specific variations in burial practices. The absence of a single, dominant burial method is a classic example of the kind of quiet, decentralized diversity that seems to define the Harappan civilization. The care with which the dead were prepared for burial, and the inclusion of grave goods suggests a belief in some form of an afterlife. But what exactly they believed is a matter of speculation. The inclusion of food and water in the graves is a clear sign that they believed the dead would need sustenance for their journey. The personal ornaments suggest that the individual's identity was carried with them into the next world. It's a peaceful and almost comforting view of death, one that is not filled with grand pronouncements, but with a simple, human concern for a loved one's final journey. It is a quiet echo of the same pragmatism and focus on a well-ordered life that defined their cities. The Harappan approach to death was, in its own way, as elegant and understated as their approach to life. It was a final, graceful act of a society that knew how to let go. While the great cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were the administrative and cultural hearts of the Indus Valley Civilization, the true engine of its prosperity lay in its sophisticated trade network, particularly the one that connected it to the wider world. The Harappans were not just builders, they were master sailors and merchants, and their greatest testament to this is the remarkable port city of Lothal. Located in what is now the state of Gujarat, Lothal was not just a small harbor. It was a bustling hub of international trade, a crucial link between the rich resources of the Indus Valley and the eager markets of ancient Mesopotamia. The air, which had for so long carried the scent of wet clay and the promise of a bountiful harvest, now also carried the unmistakable tang of salt and the exotic aroma of goods from distant lands. Lothal is most famous for its extraordinary dockyard, a structure that is still considered a marvel of ancient engineering. The dockyard was a massive rectangular basin, over 218 meters long, with an entrance channel that would have allowed ships to sail in from the Gulf of Combat. It was a man-made harbor, lined with baked bricks, a testament to the Harappans' obsession with precision and their ability to tackle large-scale civil engineering projects. The design of the dockyard, with its careful construction and the presence of a sluice gate that would have allowed them to control the water flow, suggests a deep understanding of tides and coastal hydraulics. This wasn't a happy accident. It was a deliberate, well-planned piece of infrastructure built for a specific purpose: to facilitate the movement of goods in and out of the city. Historians still argue whether the Lothal structure was a true maritime dockyard or a simple basin for loading and unloading boats. However, the evidence for a sophisticated port city is overwhelming. The city of Lothal itself was a microcosm of the entire civilization. It was a planned city with a grid-like layout, and it was a hub of a variety of specialized industries, particularly those related to trade. The archaeologists who excavated Lothal found numerous bead-making workshops, where artisans would use tiny drills to create the famous carnelian beads that were so prized in Mesopotamia. They also found evidence of shell and ivory workshops, as well as seal-making factories. The city was a place where raw materials, brought in from the interior of the Indus Valley, were transformed into valuable finished goods for export. The sound of artisans at work, the clatter of carts, and the shouts of merchants would have filled the air, a symphony of commerce and industry. The trade that flowed through Lothal was a two-way street. From the Indus Valley, they would export goods like carnelian beads, gold, cotton, and ivory, all of which were in high demand in the markets of Mesopotamia. In return, they would import raw materials that were scarce in the Indus Valley, such as tin and copper for making bronze, and possibly luxury items from the Middle East. The existence of Harappan seals in Mesopotamian cities and a few Mesopotamian artifacts at Indus sites is concrete evidence of this long-distance trade. The journey across the Arabian Sea would have been a long and perilous one, but the prosperity that it brought to the civilization was well worth the risk. It made the Harappans a major economic power in the ancient world, their influence reaching far beyond their immediate geographic boundaries. Lothal is more than just an archaeological site. It's a powerful reminder of the Harappans' entrepreneurial spirit and their deep connection to the sea. It shows us that they were not just a land-based civilization, but also a maritime power with the skills and the ambition to navigate the high seas. The dockyard at Lothal is a symbol of their ingenuity, their organization, and their ability to connect their world to the rest of the ancient world. It's a silent, brick-lined testament to a trading empire that operated without a visible king, an army, or a navy. It's the kind of place that makes you realize just how sophisticated and interconnected the ancient world really was. The Harappans were a civilization of quiet, methodical innovators, while their contemporaries in other parts of the world were building massive structures to demonstrate power. The people of the Indus Valley were perfecting the tools and techniques of daily life. Their technological and innovative genius wasn't in grand, visible displays, but in the small, practical details that made their society so efficient and well ordered. They were the original engineers of practicality, a people who understood that a well designed tool was just as important as a monumental building. Their quiet ingenuity is one of the most compelling aspects of their story. One of their most remarkable innovations was a system of standardized weights and measures. Across the entire civilization, from Mohenjo-Daro to Lothal, archaeologists have found small, polished stone cubes that were used as weights. They came in a series of perfectly consistent sizes based on a binary system for the smaller weights 1, 2, 4, 8, etc., and a decimal system for the larger ones. This level of standardization is completely unprecedented for the time and tells us that the Harappans had a sophisticated system of commerce and a high degree of central organization. It was the ancient world's version of the metric system, and it made trade and record keeping incredibly efficient. Imagine being a merchant and knowing that a 1 pound weight in your city was exactly the same as a 1 pound weight 1,000 kilometers away. It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about their society. The Harappans were also master metallurgists. They were skilled at working with copper and bronze, and they used these metals to create a wide variety of tools, weapons, and decorative objects. They knew how to create alloys, mixing copper with other metals to create a stronger and more durable material. They used bronze to create beautiful figurines, like the famous dancing girl, and they used copper to create a variety of tools, including saws, drills, and chisels. The discovery of a precise scale for measuring different materials at a site in Mohenjo-Daro shows just how scientifically they approached their craft. They were not just artisans, they were applied scientists. In addition to their work with metals, the Harappans were skilled at a variety of other crafts, including shell and ivory carving. They created beautiful ornaments, including bracelets, rings, and other decorative objects from shells that they would collect from the coast. They also worked with steatite, a soft stone, to create their iconic seals, which were not just functional, but also works of art. The precision with which they carved these tiny seals and the intricacy of the designs are truly a testament to their skill. Their technological prowess extended to other areas as well. They developed a unique type of kiln for firing their bricks, a kiln that was capable of producing perfectly uniform, waterproof bricks on a massive scale. They also had a sophisticated system of wells and water storage, including the Great Bath, which required a deep understanding of hydraulics and materials. The water management system at Dolavira, a site with a complex system of reservoirs and channels, is another example of their advanced understanding of civil engineering. This was a civilization that was obsessed with efficiency, practicality, and order, and their technological innovations were a direct reflection of these values. The Harappans' technological achievements may not have been as flashy as the pyramids of Egypt, but they were arguably more transformative for the lives of the average person. Their standardized tools, their efficient system of weights and measures, and their advanced drainage systems made their cities a place of comfort and security. Their innovations weren't designed to glorify a single person or a powerful god. They were designed to make life better for everyone. It's a quiet, humble, and deeply impressive legacy, a reminder that true greatness is often found not in the grand, but in the small, precise details that make the world work. For a civilization that seemed so perfectly designed for eternity, its decline was as mysterious and as quiet as its rise. The great cities that had stood for centuries began a slow, agonizing slide into decay. Around 1900 BCE, the intricate web of trade and urban life began to unravel, and within a few hundred years, the cities were largely abandoned. This wasn't a sudden, cataclysmic event, but a gradual, quiet fading away. The question of why remains one of the greatest archaeological puzzles. While there are no easy answers, one of the leading theories points to a formidable foe, far more powerful than any army: the unforgiving forces of environmental change. The civilization that was born of the river was also, in a cruel twist of fate, undone by it. The Indus Valley Civilization was utterly dependent on a delicate balance of climate and hydrology. The annual monsoon rains and the reliable flooding of the rivers were the lifeblood of their agricultural system. But around 2000 BCE, this delicate balance began to shift. The monsoon patterns, which had brought life-giving rain to the region for thousands of years, began to weaken and become more erratic. This is a crucial historical fact, and it's supported by paleoclimatological data from sediment cores and geological studies. The once mighty rivers, particularly the Gagar-Hakra, a river system that ran parallel to the Indus and was home to a large number of Harappan settlements, began to dry up. The great river that had fed so many cities was now turning into a series of smaller, seasonal streams. The consequences of this climate change would have been devastating. A decline in rainfall and a reduction in the river's flow would have led to a decrease in agricultural productivity. The fertile, silty soil that was deposited by the annual floods would no longer be replenished, and the once bountiful fields would have become less productive. This would have led to a food crisis, and a large-scale population that was once supported by a thriving agricultural economy would have faced a severe struggle for survival. Imagine a city of 40,000 people, a metropolis built on the promise of a reliable food source, now having to watch its lifeline slowly shrink away. It's a terrifying thought, and it's a very plausible explanation for why people would begin to abandon their homes. This environmental stress likely triggered a wave of migration. People would have left the cities and the dried-up riverbeds in search of more fertile land, scattering to the east and south towards the more reliable monsoon regions. The organized urban life that had been the hallmark of the civilization would have become untenable. The intricate trade networks would have broken down as the population dispersed, and the central administrative systems that managed the cities would have collapsed. The standardization of goods, the precise weights and measures, and the advanced plumbing, all of it would have become irrelevant in a world where the primary concern was finding enough food to survive. Historians still argue whether the decline was caused by a sudden, severe drought or a more gradual, long-term shift in climate. Whatever the specific mechanism, the environmental evidence is clear. The climate that had nurtured the civilization for so long had turned against it. The slow death of the rivers was a quiet, relentless force that even the most advanced urban planners could not stop. It was a humbling reminder that no matter how sophisticated a society becomes, it is always, at its core, dependent on the fragile and unpredictable benevolence of the natural world. The great, clean cities of the Indus Valley were not destroyed by an invading army, but by the subtle, crushing weight of a changing sky and a dying river. While environmental change provides a compelling explanation for the gradual decline of the Indus Valley Civilization, for decades, another, more dramatic theory dominated the conversation. This was the idea of a sudden, violent end at the hands of an invading force. The theory, known as the Aryan invasion theory, held that a group of nomadic, warrior-like people from Central Asia, the Aryans, swept down into the Indus Valley, conquering the native Harappans and bringing an abrupt end to their civilization. This idea, first put forward by a British archaeologist in the 1920s, became a powerful and enduring narrative. But modern scholarship has largely replaced it with a more nuanced and complex understanding. The idea of a quiet, methodical civilization being destroyed by a loud, violent one is a good story, but it just doesn't hold up to the evidence. The original basis for the theory was a series of grisly discoveries at Mohenjo-Daro, where archaeologists found groups of scattered skeletons in the streets, suggesting a massacre. The skeletons were found in seemingly haphazard positions, as if the people had been struck down and left where they fell. This, combined with the fact that the later Vedic culture of North India spoke of a conflict between the invading Aryans and the native people, seemed to provide a smoking gun. The theory was simple, dramatic, and it fit neatly into a pre-existing narrative of a great civilization being toppled by a new, more powerful culture. But as more evidence came to light, the cracks in the theory began to show. For one thing, the skeletons found at Mohenjo-Daro were not all from the same time period. Forensic analysis has shown that the bones, while found together, were separated by hundreds of years in some cases, and they don't show the kind of widespread trauma you would expect from a single, violent battle. Furthermore, there is a distinct lack of evidence for a large-scale war. We don't find a sudden, widespread destruction layer, a layer of ash and debris that would indicate a massive fire or a coordinated attack. We also don't find any large caches of weapons or evidence of a military culture. The Harappans as we've discussed, seem to have been a very peaceful people, and they had a very small number of defensive fortifications compared to their contemporaries. The silence of the archaeological record on the subject of war is deafening. So, if there wasn't an invasion, what happened? Modern scholarship has shifted the focus from invasion to migration and cultural assimilation. It is now widely believed that a series of migrations from Central Asia did indeed take place, but they were not violent conquests. Instead, they were more like a slow, steady trickle of new people and new ideas into the region. These new groups, who were likely nomadic pastoralists, brought with them a new language, a new religion, and a new set of cultural values. As they intermingled with the already declining Harappan population, the two cultures would have blended and fused, leading to a new composite culture. This process is known as cultural diffusion, and it's a much more gradual and peaceful process than an invasion. Historians now argue that the decline of the Indus cities and the rise of the later Vedic culture were two separate but connected phenomena. The Harappan civilization was already in a state of decline due to environmental factors. As the cities emptied out and the population dispersed, they would have been more susceptible to the influence of new cultures. The arrival of the new migrants would have simply hastened the process, leading to a blending of ideas and people. The legacy of the Harappans wasn't destroyed, it was transformed, its ideas and its people absorbed into a new, emerging culture that would one day lay the foundations for the great Indian subcontinent. The end of the Indus Valley Civilization was not a final scream in the night, but a long, gentle whisper into the ear of a new, young culture. The decline of the great cities of the Indus Valley wasn't an instantaneous collapse, but a slow, drawn-out process that played out over several centuries. This is what archaeologists refer to as the late Harappan period, a time of transition and transformation that saw the gradual dissolution of the urban centers and the continuation of certain cultural traits in a less complex, less centralized form. The lights didn't just go out, they flickered and dimmed one by one until the cities themselves were largely silent. It was a long goodbye, a quiet unraveling of a once great civilization. The first signs of this decline are visible in the cities themselves. The meticulous urban planning that was the hallmark of the major Harappan period began to break down. The grid-like street layouts became less defined, and new buildings were constructed haphazardly, sometimes encroaching on the public streets and the once pristine drainage systems. The standardized baked bricks, a symbol of their collective order, were replaced by less uniform, sun-dried bricks. The famous seals and the undeciphered script began to disappear from the archaeological record, suggesting a breakdown in the centralized administration and the intricate trade networks that had defined the civilization. The great cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were no longer being maintained. It was as if the society had lost its collective will to keep its urban machine running. As the cities faded, the population began to move. The people didn't just vanish, they migrated to other regions, particularly to the east and south, towards the fertile regions of Gujarat and the upper Ganga-Yamuna Doab. This population shift led to a change in the settlement patterns. The large, planned cities were replaced by smaller, less complex villages and towns. The people of these new settlements continued to practice some of the Harappan traditions. They still made pottery, used some of the same tools, and carried on certain religious practices, but the scale and the sophistication of the urban culture were gone. The unity that had been a hallmark of the civilization was now fractured into a series of smaller, regional cultures. The end of the late Harappan period isn't marked by a single event, but by a gradual cultural transformation. The new communities that emerged were a blend of the indigenous Harappan culture and the new influences brought in by the migrating peoples from the north. We see new types of pottery, like the painted grey ware, that are a distinct departure from the Harappan style. We see the introduction of new technologies, like iron tools, and a greater reliance on horse-based transportation. The quiet, peaceful culture of the Indus Valley was slowly giving way to a more dynamic and perhaps more martial culture. Historians still argue whether this cultural shift was a result of a peaceful blending or a more coercive process. The end of the Indus Valley Civilization as an urban phenomenon was a sad, but perhaps necessary conclusion. It was a civilization that was too dependent on a single, fragile environment. And when that environment changed, the civilization had to change with it. But its legacy didn't just disappear. The people, the skills, and the ideas of the Harappan civilization were not lost to history. They were absorbed and transformed, becoming a part of the vibrant, complex tapestry of later South Asian cultures. The end of the urban phase was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new chapter, one where the quiet whispers of the Indus people would continue to echo in a new form. The Indus Valley Civilization may have vanished as an urban entity, but its legacy did not simply disappear into the dust of history. The ideas, technologies, and beliefs of the Harappan people lived on, quietly influencing the cultures that would later emerge and flourish on the Indian subcontinent. The end of the cities was not a final period at the end of a sentence, but a transition, a long pause before a new chapter began. The enduring influence of the Harappan civilization is a powerful reminder that history is not a series of distinct, isolated events, but a continuous, flowing river of ideas and people. Perhaps the most significant and debated part of their legacy is the religious and cultural influence they had on later Hindu traditions. As we've discussed, the archaeological record is full of intriguing hints. The so-called Pashupati seal, with its horned, yogic figure surrounded by animals, is a prime example. Many scholars see this as a clear precursor to the Hindu god Shiva, the lord of the animals, and a great yogi. The presence of these symbols, along with what appear to be phallic stones and ring stones that some identify as a lingam and yoni, suggests that some of the core tenets of later Hindu practice, particularly the worship of Shiva and an emphasis on fertility, may have their roots in the Harappan civilization. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, with its emphasis on ritual bathing, is also seen as a forerunner to the importance of ritual purity and sacred bodies of water in later South Asian religions. While historians still argue whether the connection is direct or indirect, the evidence of a shared symbolic and ritualistic vocabulary is compelling. Beyond religion, the Harappans' influence can be seen in the material culture of later periods. Their sophisticated system of weights and measures, a crucial historical fact, was not forgotten. Later, Indian civilizations, while not using the exact same system, were known for their own standardized weights, a testament to the enduring influence of the Harappan model of commerce and administration. Their knowledge of metallurgy, particularly the use of copper and bronze, was also passed down, and later, cultures built on the Harappan skill in creating tools, weapons, and decorative objects. The techniques of pottery making, with their distinct red and black ware, also influenced later ceramic traditions. The legacy wasn't about identical copies, but about the slow, persistent flow of knowledge and skill from one generation to the next, a sort of cultural DNA that kept their genius alive. Even the urban planning and architecture of the Harappans may have left a subtle imprint. While later Indian cities did not initially follow the strict grid-like pattern of Mohenjo-Daro, the very idea of a well-planned, organized city with an emphasis on sanitation and public works was a powerful concept that would be revisited and reimagined in later eras. The memory of a civilization that built with such precision and a love of order would have been a powerful cultural touchstone, a silent whisper in the architectural imagination of a new generation. The Indus Valley Civilization, in its decline, did not vanish. It dispersed, its people and its ideas scattering across the subcontinent. The quiet pragmatism, the love of order, the artistic sensibilities, and the spiritual beliefs of the Harappans were absorbed into a new, emerging culture. The civilization of the Indus was the fertile soil from which the seeds of later South Asian history were able to sprout and grow. Its legacy is not found in grand surviving monuments, but in the enduring patterns of life, thought, and belief that continue to shape the world to this day. It is a testament to the power of a culture that built with ideas, not just with bricks. As the great urban centers of the Indus Valley slowly faded, they entered a period of cultural memory, a long twilight where the traditions of a once great civilization were held onto in a world that was becoming increasingly different. The end of the urban phase was not a final gasp, but a transition into what scholars call the post-urban or Lat Harappan phase, a time when the last remnants of the Indus people continued to live on, their great achievements a distant, fading echo. The silence that had always surrounded their history was now compounded by the silence of a lost, forgotten world, a world that would be buried for millennia before it was finally rediscovered. The post-urban phase, from roughly 1900 to 1300 BCE, is characterized by a significant change in settlement patterns. The large, well-planned cities were abandoned, their inhabitants either migrating to new, more fertile lands or simply dispersing into smaller, less organized villages. The centralized authority that had managed the standardized weights, the intricate drainage systems, and the long-distance trade networks was gone. The once uniform culture of the Indus Valley fractured into a series of regional cultures, each with its own distinct style of pottery and its own local traditions. The people of these new settlements, while still carrying on some of the Harappan traditions, had lost the knowledge and the collective will to build and maintain cities on the scale of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. The archaeological record of this period is a somber one. We see a decline in the quality of the craftsmanship. The beautifully made seals, with their intricate carvings and their mysterious script, disappear almost entirely from the archaeological record. The pottery, while still functional, is less refined and less decorated than it was during the Macha Harappan period. The standardized baked bricks are replaced by crude, sun-dried bricks, or simply by stone and mud. It's as if the society had lost its collective spark, its obsession with order and precision. The technological and artistic prowess that had defined the civilization had been largely forgotten, or at least was no longer practiced on a grand communal scale. But the people themselves did not vanish. They continued to live in the region, adapting to a new environment and a new way of life. They were a link in the chain of history, a quiet, unassuming bridge between a great, forgotten past and a new, emerging future. The memory of their great civilization, of its clean cities and its intricate network of trade, would have been a part of their oral traditions, a story of a long-lost golden age. This cultural memory, a quiet, human echo of what was once a grand civilization, is the most powerful legacy of this period. It shows us that a culture can persist even after its physical structures have crumbled into dust. The end of the post-urban phase is just as quiet as its beginning. Around 1300 BCE, the archaeological record of a distinct Harappan-related culture begins to fade away, as new cultures, with new technologies and new ways of life, begin to dominate the region. The memory of the great cities of the Indus Valley was lost to history, not to be rediscovered for over 3,000 years. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That a civilization that once spanned 1 million square kilometers, with a population of millions, could simply disappear from human memory. But its legacy, though unseen, continued to shape the world around it. A quiet and profound reminder that nothing in history truly ends. It just changes form. After the Indus Valley Civilization faded into the silence of the late Harappan period, its existence was completely lost to human memory for thousands of years. The great cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa lay buried beneath the shifting sands and silt of the Indus River, their secrets locked away in the earth. The story of their rediscovery is a tale of British colonial expansion, railroad construction, and the curious eyes of engineers and archaeologists who, almost by accident, stumbled upon the ruins of a lost world. It's a classic case of modern progress, literally unearthing the long-forgotten past. The first whispers of the civilization came in the mid-19th century, when British engineers were building the Lahore-Multan railway line. As they looked for ballast for the tracks, they found a seemingly endless supply of hard, baked bricks from a nearby mound. Without realizing it, they were dismantling the ancient city of Harappa, using its perfectly uniform bricks as raw material for their new railway. It's a somewhat tragic and ironic twist of fate that the very same bricks that symbolized the Harappans' ingenuity were now being used to build a new civilization's infrastructure. One of the engineers, a man named Alexander Cunningham, who would later become the first Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, visited the site and noted the strange seals with their undeciphered script. But he misidentified the site as being a part of a later historical period, and the significance of his discovery was not immediately understood. the whispers went unheard. The real breakthrough came in the early 20th century with the work of two Indian archaeologists, R.D. Banerjee and Daya Ram Sani. Banerjee was working at a site called Mohenjo-Daro in 1922 when he found some of the same seals that Cunningham had seen a century earlier. He realized that the artifacts were much older than previously thought, and that they were part of a unified prehistoric culture. At the same time, Sani was working at Harappa and was coming to the same conclusion. They both realized they were looking at two sites that belonged to a single, much older civilization. A civilization that predated the arrival of the Vedic culture. It was a stunning revelation, and it immediately changed the timeline of South Asian history. Their work and the subsequent excavations led by Sir John Marshall, a British archaeologist who was the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, finally brought the Indus Valley Civilization to the attention of the world. The excavations at both Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa revealed the sophisticated urban planning, the advanced drainage systems, and the beautiful artifacts that we've been talking about. It was a massive undertaking, and it was a logistical and intellectual challenge. They had to dig through thousands of years of accumulated soil and silt, meticulously documenting every artifact and every layer of the city. Marshall's work, which culminated in the publication of a 3-volume report on Mohenjo-Daro, was a landmark in the history of archaeology. The rediscovery of the Indus Valley Civilization was more than just a finding of old ruins. It was a rewriting of history. It pushed the timeline of South Asian history back by thousands of years and showed that the subcontinent was home to one of the world's first great urban civilizations, a civilization that was a peer to ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. It was a humbling and a profound discovery, and it made the people of the subcontinent aware that their history was far older and far more complex than they had previously imagined. The quiet, silent world of the Harappans was finally speaking to us again, not with their voices, but with the silent testimony of their bricks and their bones, with the civilization now unearthed and its physical presence a known fact. The greatest intellectual challenge remained: to give a voice to the silent script that was found on thousands of seals and artifacts. The decipherment attempts of the Indus script have been a century-long saga of brilliant minds, false starts, and enduring mystery. It's a modern-day puzzle that has resisted every attempt to solve it, and its refusal to yield its secrets is a testament to its unique complexity. The silence of the script is one of the most frustrating and fascinating aspects of the entire story. The first attempts at decipherment began almost as soon as the script was discovered. Scholars, armed with little more than a handful of seals and a deep knowledge of other ancient languages, tried to apply the same methods that had worked for Egyptian hieroglyphs and Mesopotamian cuneiform. But the Indus script proved to be a different kind of beast entirely. For one thing, there's no Rosetta Stone, that crucial bilingual text that allowed us to crack the code of ancient Egypt. We have no parallel inscriptions in a known language, so every attempt to decipher it has been a theoretical exercise, a guessing game played with the highest of intellectual stakes. The sheer brevity of the inscriptions is another major hurdle. The average inscription is only about 5 characters long, and the longest one is only 26 characters. This is a crucial historical fact, and it means that there isn't enough context to figure out the grammatical structure or the meaning of the individual signs. It's like trying to understand a novel by reading only the first 5 words of every sentence. The lack of long narrative texts, which are so common in other ancient civilizations, is what makes the Indus script so incredibly difficult to decipher. Over the years, numerous theories have been proposed, each with its own passionate advocates and its own flaws. Some scholars have argued that the script is a form of Proto-Dravidian, an ancient language that is a precursor to the languages spoken in southern India today. They point to some of the symbols that seem to correspond to Dravidian words, but without more evidence, the theory remains unproven. Others have argued that it is an Indo-European language, a theory that is often tied to the old Aryan invasion hypothesis. But this too is largely unsubstantiated. Still others have argued that the script isn't a language at all, but a collection of non-linguistic symbols used for religious or commercial purposes. The debate has become a matter of national pride in both India and Pakistan, and it has led to some of the most heated scholarly arguments in modern archaeology. Historians still argue whether the script represents a language related to Sanskrit or to a pre-existing indigenous tongue. In recent years, scholars have turned to technology to try and solve the mystery. They've used computer algorithms to analyze the signs, looking for patterns and recurring sequences that might reveal something about the script's underlying structure. But even with the power of modern computing, the script has remained silent. The enduring mystery of the Indus script is a powerful reminder of how much we still don't know about this civilization. The fact that we can't read their words means that their thoughts, their beliefs, their literature, and their history remain a closed book to us. We can see their cities and admire their art, but we can't hear their voices. The silent script is a constant, humbling challenge, a reminder that the past is a foreign country and that some of its secrets may remain buried forever. It is the final, enigmatic piece of a puzzle that may never be fully solved. The story of the Indus Valley Civilization is a story of quiet genius and profound mystery, but it is not a finished story. Even with a century of archaeological work and the advent of new technologies, many of the most fundamental questions about the Harappans remain unanswered. This is what makes the civilization so endlessly fascinating to scholars and the public alike. The fact that it is a living, evolving field of study, full of lively debates and new discoveries that constantly force us to reevaluate what we thought we knew. The questions are as important as the answers. One of the most persistent and debated topics is the nature of the Harappan political system. We've discussed the striking absence of a grand palace, a monumental temple, or a powerful king. This has led to the theory that the Indus people were a highly egalitarian society, governed by a council of elders or merchants. But historians still argue whether this is truly the case. Some scholars suggest that a single, centralized authority did exist, but that its power was expressed in different ways, not through individual grandeur, but through the collective, administrative control necessary to build and maintain the standardized cities and their complex trade networks. The power may have been held by a class of religious figures or by a group of wealthy merchants who were more concerned with commerce than with conquest. The debate is a crucial one, as it changes our entire understanding of how this society functioned. Another major scholarly debate revolves around the civilization's mysterious decline. While the environmental theory is now the leading hypothesis, the exact sequence of events is still a matter of debate. Was it a sudden, catastrophic drought, or a more gradual, long-term change in the monsoon patterns? Was the drying up of the Gagar-Hakra river system the cause, or a symptom of a larger climate shift? And how did the different regions of the civilization respond to this crisis? The answers to these questions are still being pieced together through a combination of archaeological data, geological studies, and ancient climate modeling. The old Aryan invasion theory, while largely debunked, still has some adherents, and the debate over the nature of the migration and its impact on the Harappans continues to be a lively and at times a very heated one. Perhaps the most frustrating and persistent debate is the one over the Indus script. Is it a language or a collection of symbols? Is it related to a known language family, like Dravidian or Indo-European? Or is it an isolated, unique script that will forever remain a mystery? The inability to read the script has created a kind of scholarly black hole, where a lack of evidence is often used to support wildly different theories. Some scholars spend their entire careers trying to find a pattern or a key that might unlock the script's secrets, while others have given up hope, convinced that it will never be deciphered. The ongoing nature of these debates is a good thing. It means that the story of the Indus Valley Civilization is not a dead, static one. It's a story that is constantly being written, revised, and rewritten with every new discovery. The quiet, methodical work of archaeologists and scholars continues to shed new light on this amazing culture. And the answers to some of these questions may be buried just a few feet below the surface, waiting for the right person to find them. The story of the Indus people is a powerful reminder that history is not a collection of settled facts, but a living, breathing process of discovery and interpretation. To truly understand the significance of the Indus Valley Civilization, you have to place it in the context of its contemporaries. This wasn't some isolated, prehistoric society. It was a major player on the global stage, a peer to the great river valley civilizations of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. When we compare the Harappans to these more well-known cultures, a fascinating picture emerges, a picture that highlights the unique and in some ways more advanced nature of the Indus people. The world stage in the 3rd millennium BCE was a crowded place, and the Harappans held their own with quiet confidence. Let's start with Egypt. While the Egyptians were building massive pyramids and carving elaborate tombs for their god kings, the Harappans were building something entirely different. There are no pyramids in the Indus Valley, no grand monuments built to glorify a single person. Instead, their monumental works were practical. The Great Bath, the granaries, and the vast, intricate drainage systems that served the entire city. The Egyptian civilization was highly stratified, with a powerful pharaoh at the top and a mass of farmers and laborers at the bottom. The Harappans, as we've discussed, seem to have been a more egalitarian society, one that focused on the collective good rather than the individual ego. Their greatness was in their city planning and their public works, not in their ostentatious displays of power. Now, let's compare them to Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Mesopotamia was a collection of powerful, often warring, city-states, each with its own king and its own patron deity. They built towering ziggurats as temples to their gods, and they kept detailed records on clay tablets, using their cuneiform script to record everything from royal decrees to commercial transactions. The Harappans, in contrast, were a remarkably unified culture across a vast area, but without the visible signs of a single, centralized government. Their script, while intricate, was used for a very different purpose, mostly for short inscriptions on seals, a far cry from the detailed administrative and literary texts of the Mesopotamians. While the Mesopotamians were writing down the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Harappans were busy standardizing their weights and measures. It's an interesting contrast in priorities, isn't it? The Harappans were also far ahead of their contemporaries in terms of urban sanitation and public health, a crucial historical fact. Their covered drainage systems and private bathrooms were centuries ahead of their time. While the great cities of Ur and Babylon were often described as chaotic and smelly, the cities of the Indus Valley were meticulously clean and organized. This quiet focus on hygiene and public welfare is one of the most unique and enduring aspects of their legacy. In a global context, the Indus Valley Civilization stands out as a unique and fascinating model of human development. It was a civilization that achieved an incredible level of urban sophistication without the visible signs of a powerful king or a massive army. It was a civilization that valued order, practicality, and the collective good. It was, in many ways, an outlier in the ancient world, a quiet, peaceful giant that showed that greatness could be achieved not through force and monumental ego, but through a shared commitment to a well-ordered and prosperous society. The story of the Harappans is a powerful reminder that there is more than one way to build a civilization, and their way was arguably one of the most successful. The story of the Indus Valley Civilization isn't over. While the great cities are long buried and their script remains a mystery, the work of archaeologists, historians, and scientists continues to this day. The past is not a static place, and with every new discovery, a new piece of the puzzle is revealed, forcing us to reevaluate what we thought we knew about this remarkable culture. The final chapter of the story is, in a way, still being written, a testament to the enduring fascination of a world that was lost and found again. In recent years, new discoveries have been made that are changing our understanding of the civilization. At a site called Rakhigarhi in modern-day Haryana, archaeologists have found evidence of what may have been a city even larger than Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. The ongoing excavation of this massive site is a major development and could change our understanding of the civilization's geographic extent and its population centers. New sites are also being discovered along the dry bed of the ancient Gaga Hakra River, a reminder that the story is far from complete and that the desert still holds many secrets. Beyond new sites, new technologies are also shedding light on old mysteries. Scientists are using genetic analysis to study the remains of the Harappan people, hoping to learn more about their origins and their relationship to the later populations of the Indian subcontinent. The initial findings suggest a complex picture of a population that was genetically distinct from the later Indo-European speakers, a finding that adds more weight to the theory of a peaceful migration rather than a violent conquest. These new scientific approaches are providing a level of detail that would have been unimaginable just a few decades ago, and they are helping us to fill in the gaps in our knowledge. Historians still argue whether the genetic data will be the key to finally solving the puzzle of the Indus script, with some believing that a link to a known language family might be found in the genetic makeup of the ancient population. The future of Indus studies is a bright and exciting one. As new sites are discovered and new technologies are applied, we will continue to learn more about the lives of these quiet, methodical people. The mystery of the script may one day be solved, and the silent whispers of the Harappans may finally be heard. The story of the Indus Valley Civilization is a testament to the power of human ingenuity and resilience, and it is a reminder that even the most ancient of cultures can still speak to us today. And so, we come to the end of our journey, a long and winding tale of a civilization that rose from the earth and then returned to it, leaving behind a legacy of quiet genius and enduring mystery. As you drift off to sleep, let your mind wander to the quiet, dusty fields of the Indus Valley, to the clean, straight streets of Mohenjo-Daro, and to the silent, watchful unicorn on a tiny seal. Imagine the sound of the potter's wheel, the rustle of cotton in the fields, and the gentle lapping of the river that gave them life. The people of the Indus Valley are still there, in the soil and in the stones, a part of the long, beautiful story of humanity. Their quiet whispers, now a gentle lullaby, carrying you off to a peaceful and well-ordered dream.